talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Tuesday edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. And people, we have made it. How about this? This is the week 1 college football preview. Nothing else to say, nothing else to talk about. I am so fired up. So here is the deal. Here's just the big picture, 30,000-foot view for the season ahead. So obviously week 0 is in the books. Week 1 is coming up. We got ourselves a loaded slate. We're talking about all the big games on today's show. Miami, Florida, Clemson-Georgia, Notre Dame A&M, LSU-USC. We're going to kind of go in all different directions, just kind of hit on the big games as I see them. But just so everybody knows, Tuesday night on YouTube going forward, Wednesday morning on the pod, that will be our official weekend college football preview. Back when I started doing pods a million years ago, you used to do your picks on Fridays. That is not how the world works anymore. You guys and girls have spoken. You guys and girls have told me earlier in the week, the better. By the time we get to Tuesday, Wednesday of the week, we want to start looking ahead to that Saturday. And so that's exactly what we're going to do today. And bluntly, that's exactly what we're going to do all week. So again, or all season, excuse me. So loaded show, fun show, busy show. Before we get started, the usual reminders. 1, if you are not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, please make sure to do so. YouTube, we're closing in on 43,000 subscribers. I think we can get well past 50,000 by, early to mid-September. I need your support. Make sure to click subscribe if you're not already. Also, make sure to put on those notifications so you know when we go live. Also, if you are listening on podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, make sure to subscribe. If you want to do your boy Torres a favor, leave a rating and review so that we can move up those Apple and Spotify charts. With that said, listen, this is not the day for me to blab off the top. There is no more time to waste. So let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day is football. That's all it is. Just football. Football. I am so fired up. Listen, I don't know if it's because we haven't had college football in 9-10 months. I don't know if it's because it's a new season with new storylines, new conferences, new playoff. But whatever the case, I am so excited for this season ahead. And I am so excited for this loaded week 1 slate. By the way, if you followed the picks last year, we ended strong, nailed all 3 playoff games, spreads, picks, you name it. And so let's go ahead and dive into this week 1 slate. By the way, should always mention, we'll be transparent with you. Not all the big games that I will have. I won't have a pick on all the big games, but this week 1, I do. Let's go ahead and start maybe in not the most obvious place, maybe in the most interesting place, because when I look at this week 1 slate, we have 3 matchups of top 25 opponents, but I think there are really 2 games that, to me, whoever ends up losing that game, there is going to be chaos on that team's message board that evening, okay? And so let's start with what I believe to be the most intriguing week 1 game, the Miami Hurricanes visiting the Florida Gators. As you can see on your screen if you're watching on YouTube, Miami, a 2.5-point road favorite in the Swamp, over-under set at 54.5. And so when I look at this game, listen, a couple things stand out about both these teams. First of all, with Florida, listen, we've talked Florida so much over the course of this offseason. I have been critical of Billy Napier. And listen, it's for all the reasons that we have discussed over the course of the summer. It's not that he went 6-7 in year 1. It's not that he went 5-7 in year 2. It is the lack of consistency on a week in, week out basis with the Gators. You look at just last year, for example. You have, for example, the great win over Tennessee. Follow it up by getting destroyed at Kentucky. Kentucky 300-plus yards rushing offense in that game. Ray Davis becomes a Heisman candidate overnight. Then you rally, you start to get better, you're playing better. You lose at home to Arkansas. Inexcusable. Later in the year, there's the LSU debacle, 600 yards of total offense for Jaden Daniels. But then, just when you're ready to give up on Billy Napier, they nearly beat Missouri. So it's just ups and downs, ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys. And listen, we know about the schedule. We know about this team, but it will be curious. Can you get a level of consistency in year 3? Billy Napier saying all the right things, but we got to see it on the field, right? As far as Miami is concerned, listen. If you listen to the Aaron Torres pod, you know exactly how I feel about the Hurricanes. I do have Miami as my ACC champion. By the way, I was on this like a month ago. We did our way too early bracket back in late July, early August. I had Miami as my ACC champion. Felt like a lot of people kind of piled on that train as the offseason went on. But when you look at Miami, we've discussed it. Bottom line is, even people in this conference acknowledge. I've said it many times. I have a buddy close to the Florida State program. Probably talked to him 2 weeks before that team went to Dublin for week 0. And he said point blank, he said, look, the most talented team in this conference is Miami. Now, Mario Cristobal has had his game day miscues, but as I say often, last 3 years at Oregon, 3 Pac-12 title game appearances, 2 Pac-12 titles, and this roster is starting to look like a Mario Cristobal roster. First of all, you bring in Cam Ward from Washington State. We all know what he did there. Nearly 7,000 yards passing in 2 years there, 48 touchdowns. Before that was at Incarnate Word, put up all sorts of stats. Damian Martinez, the running back transfer from Oregon State. Elite offensive line play. Jalen Rivers, Maui Oga, both those guys are going to be first-round picks at some point. And then, oh, by the way, the defense is led by the defensive line, Ruben Bain, who, oh, by the way, if you listen to Billy Napier's press conference on Monday in the lead up to this game, Billy Napier pointed out Ruben Bain is a monster and he is going to be an issue for us. So that's kind of the two teams coming in. With Florida, the one thing I will say, not a massive overhaul, but do want to go ahead and quickly give credit to Graham Mertz, because this is a guy that last year I gave a ton of flack to. Was a guy that coming into the year from Wisconsin was a turnover machine, struggled. Billy Napier, for all my criticism, I'll go ahead and give him a little bit of credit, because he said in the preseason, he said, we talked to Paul Chryst. They thought they used him wrong. They believed in Graham Mertz. And so Graham Mertz did have a good season. And he, I think, is the reason for hope, if you have it with Florida, is that he was a good quarterback last year. A lot of key pieces returning. And so let's get into this game itself. As I said, as we record here on Tuesday. Now, by the way, it's important to note, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on Thursday, Friday, lines move. But we are recording Tuesday. Miami, a 2.5 point, as I said, road favorite with the over-under of 54.5. And so when I look at this game, if you've listened to the first couple minutes of this preview, I think your assumption is, well, Torres has been crushing Billy Napier, and Torres has Miami winning the ACC. This is going to be a Canes runaway. I'm sorry, I actually don't see it that way at all. And instead, to me, it's actually the exact opposite. As crazy as it sounds, I think Florida probably is in pretty good position. If they're ever going to, listen, they need to win games. We know that. We know how tough the schedule is. But I actually like this matchup, and I actually like how it falls for Florida. Let me explain. First off, credit Florida fans. Listen, I know last year was frustrating, okay? But however Billy Napier did it, it does feel like the majority of Florida fans sort of maybe a wait and see, but it feels like they want to believe in this team, that things will be different, that things will be improved. And listen, we can't extrapolate out 12, 13, 14 weeks to December 15th. And is Billy Napier still there? But the one thing I can say, I don't know what the crowds are going to be like in the swamp if Florida is 3-4 after 7 games. But in week 1, this crowd is going to be incredible. Sellout crowd, getting price. I looked on Tuesday, it was like $180. So the crowd is going to be loud. It's going to be hot. I don't think that necessarily favors either team. But I am interested in the matchup of quarterbacks. Went out of my way to reference Graham Mertz. Think he was excellent last year. For all of Florida's problems, Graham Mertz wasn't one of them. Same time with Cam Ward. Listen, I love Cam Ward, but something stands out to me as he goes into a tough road environment at the Swamp. It's the fact that this is a guy that, for all the dazzling plays, as incredible as he's been, this is a guy that has struggled with turnovers in his career. Kind of a crazy stat. I'm going to make sure that I have this accurate before I put it out there. 46 fumbles in a 4-year college career to this point. Now, not all of them have ended up as turnovers. That is just an insane stat. 46 turnovers. And what I think is a couple things. One, you're going into a crazy road environment. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say he's never played in great road environments before. He's played at Washington. He's played at Oregon. He's played in some tough places. But you know what else I think about going into this road environment? And we'll talk about this with some of these other big games. I am curious about the helmet communication, okay? And this is a little bit of a side tangent. But anybody who watched that Georgia Tech Florida State game noticed one thing, I think, pretty obviously. Florida State had the crowd advantage in that place. And you could see throughout that game, Haynes King, there was 3-4 times where he's covering his ears trying to hear what his offensive coordinator is putting in his ear. And so I bring it up because think about if Haynes King is having trouble struggling to hear the play call from his offensive coordinator on what was essentially a neutral field, good luck in front of 90,000 Gator fans in the Swamp. Now, I know Miami's going to bring fans as well, but you get the point. And so I look at this game, home field advantage, turnover-prone quarterback in Cam Ward. And then finally, and I think this is important, listen, I said it about Billy Napier a minute ago. I can criticize, but the crazy thing about him is it feels like every time that you're ready to give up on Billy Napier, he figures out a way to do the exact opposite of what you expect, right? So again, you go back to Tennessee last year. They got beat pretty bad by Utah in the opening game of the season. 2 weeks later, they host Tennessee. Everybody thinks that Florida's going to get killed. They end up winning the game. Then later in the year, and there's the ebbs and flows. He certainly had valleys, but then just when you're ready to give up on the season, nearly beats Missouri late in the year. So the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, when people kind of think, okay, maybe something good can happen, maybe something positive, Utah last year, Kentucky last year after they beat Tennessee, that's when things start to fall apart. But when there are low expectations, it feels like Billy Napier figures things out. Listen, as I said, I don't know if this team's going to go 8-4. I don't know if Billy Napier is going to do enough to keep his job. But do I believe he can do enough at home opening day with the less turnover-prone quarterback to win this game? I do. So not only am I taking the +2.5, I am actually taking the Florida money line at FanDuel.com. I'll tell you what the odds are there as the Florida money line against Miami. Really quick, let me make sure that I have the updated stats here. The money line is +114. Florida, a 2.5-point favorite. I am taking Florida to win outright. So I mentioned a minute ago, I said I believe there are 2 games where whoever loses, the fan base of that respective loser is going to go crazy on the message board. One is Florida-Miami, and yes, I do think Miami fans will be unhappy if Miami loses to Florida. But the second game where I think there is a lot at stake for both programs, it's the Sunday night game. By the way, shout out college football for giving us another doozy of a – this is one of the great random things that the sports calendar gives us is the Sunday night college football game. Last 2 years, we've gotten Florida State LSU, 1 year in New Orleans, 1 year in Orlando, I believe, last year. Well, this year, we get USC versus LSU in Vegas, and you talk about 2 teams. I'm telling you, whoever loses this game, I just think you look at the schedules, it's going to be hard to see the scenario where those 2 teams respectively, whoever it is, put together the season that you're hoping for. I think I mentioned it, by the way, LSU, a 4.5-point favorite out there at Allegiant Stadium, over-under set at 63.5. Thought about trying to go out to this game in Vegas after my radio show on Saturday, but don't think I'm going to be able to make it work. So let's start with these 2 teams. And listen, I think everybody kind of knows the narrative on both. USC, you don't need me to tell you. Last year was a disaster. Last year was a debacle. You go 7-5. You have the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. And it was all about the defense, right? The defense was just so embarrassingly bad. There is nothing else to say. And I think what kind of is crazy to me is because the defense was so bad. People, and this kind of goes to like the NFL draft narrative. Like, I think people think Caleb Williams was worse than he was because the defense was so bad that they lost games, okay? So here are some of the games that USC lost because of that defense. 34-32 to Utah with a third-string quarterback. Gave up 48 in a loss to Notre Dame. The game that finally got Alex Grinch fired, 52-42 is the final score. And oh, by the way, the last regular season win of Caleb Williams' career, a 50-49 victory over Cal. So Caleb Williams is gone. Miller Moss is in. But the big story this offseason is, of course, that defense. The new defensive coordinator, Anthony Lynn's son. He was at UCLA. He transformed that defense at UCLA. And we'll see if he can do the same. But then also, the other story is, of course, that Miller Moss is in at quarterback for USC. He played in USC's bowl game and was actually awesome with 6 touchdown passes. As for LSU, so I'll say this for LSU, and I've said it a million times, and if you heard me on the Aaron Torres pod, forgive me. I'm a Brian Kelly guy, okay? I've said it a lot. I like Brian Kelly. I respect Brian Kelly. He was at Cincinnati as a coach when I was at UConn as a budding student. So I've seen him up close for years and years now, basically decades now. And I like this guy, and I believe he's the right coach for LSU. But it's been kind of a couple weird years for LSU, right? Each of the last 2 seasons, you lose that opening game. We talked about this with Trey Wallace if you listen to Tuesday night, Wednesday morning's pod. We talked about this with Trey Wallace the other day, is that like all these SEC teams, you can kind of encapsulate like the vibe around them in a sentence or two. Like Alabama, fired up about the DeBoer era. Tennessee, the future is bright. Like you could go on and on down the list. But LSU is kind of the weird one, right? Back-to-back 10-win seasons, that's a positive, but it's LSU. You kind of expect more. Last 2 years, you lose your opener. That's not good. Last year, you're basically out of the playoff race by October 1st because you lost that second game at Ole Miss. Defense is bad. Offense is good. Recruiting is good. There's just so many weird parallel things going on with this LSU football program. I don't really know where they are right now. And what I think is going to actually be interesting about this game is obviously, look, and I should mention it, LSU last year, 10-3. They have Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winner. Their defense in its own right was terrible, just like USC's. And what's interesting about this game is that when I look at this game, I think the first hunch with LSU is, this is just what I'm curious about. I don't think we have an answer, and I don't think we will get an answer until this game kicks off on Sunday night. But what I'm curious, what is LSU's offense, right? Because the last couple years, we've seen Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, they're throwing the ball all over the field, the best offense in college football a year ago. Well, not only are Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, they're all gone. Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, is gone. And then, oh, by the way, on top of that, what's interesting about this year's team, Garrett Nussmeier really hasn't been a starter to speak of. I know he started a couple bowl games, but we know that's not the same. But at the same time, what's interesting about this team, new quarterback, you lose 2 starters, 2 first rounders at wide receiver. You lose your offensive coordinator. But the other interesting thing, the strength of this specific LSU team, probably the best pair of offensive tackles in all of college football. Will Campbell, probably going to be the number 1 tackle off the board in next year's NFL draft. Emory Jones might be the number 2 tackle off the board. So I guess my question is, I don't really know. Is LSU going to be kind of more of a run-based team? They don't have a ton of experience at the running back position. Logan Diggs is gone. Or are they going to be the team that airs it out like they have in previous years? And then maybe as important, are they going to air it out or try to air it out or try to put up points against this USC offense? Because listen, I'm not a scheme expert, right? But at the same time, you don't want to go score for score with USC. You probably want to control the ball on the ground. And I think my hunch is that there are going to be games where they let Garrett Nussmeier rip. I don't know if this is one of them. And because of that, I actually changed my pick in this game in the lead up to it. All summer long, I was on the over. I said 2 new defensive coordinators. Offenses have not been the issue at these 2 schools. But as I got deeper and deeper into prep, I just don't know what we're going to see from LSU. And so I'm staying away from the over. By the way, I should mention the over was 61.5 when the lines first came out. As we record here on Tuesday, it is now at 63.5. So the line is going up. Vegas does expect a shootout. I'm not positive we get that. But what I also will say is this. I actually like USC to cover the points, keep it close, and potentially win outright. And listen, I know everybody, Torres, how can you back Lincoln Riley? He's the worst football coach that's ever walked the face of the earth, right? Listen to Paul Feinbaum, who says he's going to be replaced by Deion Sanders. By the way, credit Paul Feinbaum. One day he says Deion's irrelevant. The next day he says that he's replacing Lincoln Riley at USC. So you have Paul Feinbaum saying Lincoln Riley's out. Yeah, other people saying he's a glorified offensive coordinator. Should it be a head coach? Overrated, soft. TOB or what is it? TBOW. We know what that B word out west. That's what Oklahoma fans call him. Anyway, I'm rambling. The point I'm trying to make is for all the criticism, the one thing you can't criticize with Lincoln Riley, that offense always figures out a way to put up points, right? I mean, even last year, again, Caleb Williams' final win as a USC quarterback, they put up 50 points. But in 10 of the 13 games that they played, they put up at least 30. You look at the 3 games they didn't: rainy, cold Notre Dame, rainy, cold Oregon, and then UCLA the last game of the year when they weren't playing for anything. So they've always been able to put up points. Miller Moss, to me, is going to be able to step in. He looked great in the bowl game. You have an off season of prep work, and you have an off season to kind of get ready for this season ahead. But then more than that, I think the other interesting thing is I just sit there and say that I'm just not sold that this LSU defense is going to be significantly better. This was a team that in their 3 losses last year gave up 45 points to Florida State, 55 to Ole Miss, 42 to Bama. And I know that, we're going to kind of move around Harold Perkins. He's going to take on a different role. But that secondary was so bad. Secondary ranked, by the way, 115th nationally in pass defense a year ago. And so I look at USC, they're going to be able to move the ball. And listen, I want to be gutsy. I want to say I'm going to take USC outright. But from a betting perspective, and that's all we try to do is give out these picks, I'm going to take USC plus the points. USC plus 4.5 in this game, an official AT best bet. I think they can win. I think they might win. I think that offense is not going to be slowed down by this defense at LSU. And by the way, even if USC's defense is only incrementally better, I do think there's a scenario where this game could be close, will be close, and I think USC can win outright. So that is my official AT best bet on this game. LSU is a 4.5-point favorite. I'm taking USC plus 4.5. By the way, if you are subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel, we will be going live right after this game on Sunday night. Cannot wait. I am as excited about this game as any. All right, really quickly, let's get to one more game. And then from there, we will take a quick break, come back, and break down the rest of the week 1 slate. In the least surprising news ever, your boy Torres is going very long. But let's go to an intriguing, I guess you would say, early day matchup on Saturday. Noon Eastern, Clemson versus Georgia. And if you want an idea of the difference in these 2 programs at this point, remember, 3 years ago, the 2021 season, Clemson and Georgia played the opening weekend. Clemson was a 1.5-point favorite. Georgia ended up winning 13-3. That was the first of their 2 national championship runs. But I bring it up because Clemson 3 years ago, 36 months ago, was a 1.5-point favorite. Clemson is now a 13.5-point underdog. Georgia, obviously, that would make them a 13.5-point favorite in this game. 48.5. Again, we're recording on Tuesday. The over-under win total set at 48.5. We will see if that changes over the course of this week. In terms of this game, listen, with Georgia, I don't know that I need to share all that much. We all remember what happened last year. Blitz through the regular season, lose to Bama in that SEC championship game. And as I've said 1,000 times this offseason, you ask the bookmakers across college football, They'll tell you that if Georgia had made the playoff, they would have been favored against every team, even Michigan, and even a rematch with Bama. So the Vegas said they were the best team in college football last year. It doesn't matter. Michigan's a deserving champion. If you're a Michigan fan, I'm not crapping on your team. They were my preseason pick to win it, by the way. So why would I care? But at the same time, Georgia was awesome. Georgia now has a chip on their shoulder. But what I think is also interesting about Georgia is this. I think because Georgia has historically been so good on defense, I think it's kind of interesting to note that offensively they were awesome last year. Like the defense was fine. Defense was top 20 nationally. They had the number 2 offense in the SEC, top 5 nationally. The only offense that was better was Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas at LSU. But Georgia, Carson Beck threw for 3,900 yards. I don't think people realize how awesome that guy was a year ago. And so he's got plenty of talent around him. Now, it'll be interesting. Trevor Etienne, who transferred from Florida, be very interesting. He got a DUI over the course of the offseason. Now, it was pled down in court, but he was one of several Georgia players to get arrested. Kirby Smart would not discuss the status of his game. Based on Kirby Smart's history, you'd assume that he's going to play at some point. He's at running back. Wide receiver room is stacked. You know, I've heard a lot of Brock Bowers. Can you replace him? I don't know if anybody replaces the best tight end, one of the best tight ends we've ever seen in college football. Oscar Delp's pretty good, though. They got plenty of depth at that position. They added a transfer from Stanford as well. And the defense, listen, Kirby's going to tell you all this stuff about this is the least depth we've ever had. We don't have the elite pass rushers that we've had in the past. Those are first world problems, okay? Because Georgia's got as much talent as anybody probably in college football, you know, on that defensive side of the football. You look at all 3 levels. Mykel Williams on the defensive line. Smile Munden at linebacker, another player, by the way, who got arrested in the offseason. Don't expect him to not play in this game. Secondary obviously did lose a lot with Bullard and some of the other guys that they lost over the course of the last season. But it doesn't change the fact Malachi Starks is back. You had a couple nice pieces. Is this where maybe KJ Bolden, the true freshman, gets some reps? But the point I'm trying to make, talent across the board. From the Clemson perspective, listen, there's a time and a place to criticize Clemson. This isn't like, I'm not going to do the big, like, Dabo doesn't use the portal. What's going on? By the way, saw on Monday that Dabo is no longer taking phone calls for his coach's show. So I just bring it up because, look, there's a time, there's a place to talk Dabo, his decision-making. It ain't this week, even though I do think it can impact this game. From the Clemson perspective, listen, to me, the most interesting story, not only in this game, but I would argue one of the more interesting stories in all of college football is what becomes of the Cade Klubnik-Garrett Riley relationship. Remember, Cade Klubnik was as highly rated as anybody coming out of high school in that 2022 class. Comes to Clemson. Basically, he doesn't redshirt as a freshman because he played in a bunch of games, but they basically forced DJU out, put him in the ACC championship game. He rolls. We all assume it's going to be like explosive last year when they bring in Garrett Riley, Lincoln Riley's brother, who of course was the offensive coordinator at TCU 2 years ago. Doesn't really happen that way though. Cade Klubnik ends up completing 64% of his passes, 19 TDs, 9 interceptions. Now, in his defense, it is worth noting, the O-line has not been very good over the last couple years and certainly wasn't good enough last year. I think what's also worth noting is that the wide receiver room hasn't been its vintage self. Now, they did add a couple 5-stars this year. Bryant Wesco from Texas was one of them. The other one outside of Bryant Wesco was TJ Moore, a 5-star from Florida. So they have talent in that room. It is young talent. And to Clemson's credit, that front line of the defense is elite with Peter Woods, with all sorts of talent. Obviously, Barrett Carter making kind of a surprising decision to return. TJ Parker was a first-team freshman All-American a year ago. Now, in terms of this game, I'll be honest. Listen, I'm not as down on Clemson as most people. Not as down on them as most people. Okay, let me get that out of the way. I do have them in the playoff as the second representative from the ACC, behind only Miami. But at the same time, I don't love this matchup, and I do think this is a matchup where Clemson could be in trouble for a very specific reason. The portal stuff. I'm not going to crush Dabo. This isn't, again, I'm not going to do it. But at the same time, this is where I think the portal stuff matters. Because Dabo's big thing about the portal is, we're not going to recruit over the guys that we have, and that's not how we do things. Okay, I respect that. I get it. Whatever. And the issue is not your front 22. Nobody's debating the talent on your defense. Nobody's debating the young talent at wide receiver that you have on offense. The issue is that over the course of a game against an elite team and over the course of a season, are you going to have the depth that you need to compete at the highest levels? Okay. That's not my opinion. It's an indisputable fact. When even if you're only losing 8, 10 guys, 12 guys to the portal every offseason, first of all, that's not even huge attrition. I think Georgia lost like 23. But even if you're losing 8, 10, 12 guys, and now you're replacing them with only freshmen, with only guys that are 18 years old, it means you don't have a lot of depth. You don't have competitive depth. And the guys that you're putting in are super young. And so nobody's worried about that front line. Nobody's worried about it. I worry about, 1, week 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 2, against a team like Georgia that can keep rotating bodies against you. And so I look at this game. I do have a best bet. I think it's Georgia minus 13.5. Now, look, I think this is a game. I could see it being 7-6 at the half. I could see it being 13-10 Clemson at the half. But what I worry about is over the course of 40 minutes, do you have those dudes against a team like might not matter against Wake Forest, might not matter against Pitt, might not matter against NC State, but against Georgia? Yeah, I believe that it will matter. And I believe that Georgia's going to be able to ground and pound late, run over. I don't want to say run over because the Clemson defensive front is nasty. But you just run out of bodies. You just run out of depth. There's just only so many hits your guys can take, again, especially against a team as good as Georgia. So give me Georgia to win. I'll say 31-14. I think Georgia wins. I think Georgia covers. And I think come Monday, we're asking the same questions about Dabo that we have really for the last 2 or 3 years. All right, so what we're going to do, take a quick break. When we come back, we got more college football, baby. Don't you worry. We are going to hit on all the rest of the big games. We're going to talk, how about this? A&M hosting Notre Dame. Colorado, the Buffaloes. You know you want to talk Coach Prime, even if you don't think you want to talk Coach Prime. And we'll talk Penn State, West Virginia, an intriguing matchup. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute. But before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. Hi, back. Good to be back. So let's get to the rest of the week one slate. There are 3 top 25 matchups in total in week one. We've talked about 2 of them. Clemson and Georgia on Saturday, USC-LSU on Sunday night, the rare Sunday night college football game, but I'm so fired up for that one. You know what else I'm fired up for? How about this? Saturday night, College Station, Texas. College game day is there as the Notre Dame Fighting Irish travel to Texas to take on the Texas A&M Aggies. Texas A&M actually a 2.5-point favorite in this one. The over-under set at 46.5. In terms of Texas A&M, listen, you don't need me to tell you what the big story is coming into this one. It is the dawn of the Mike Elko era in College Station. Listen, we've done our Jimbo Fisher rants and raves and takes and this and that. I saw he's starting the media tour, saw him on Monday on SiriusXM talking about how he's ready for another opportunity. So we may be discussing Jimbo Fisher in the future, but he, of course, was fired late last season. There was that half a moment where you thought Mark Stoops was going to get the job, but Mike Elko gets it. And I'm so excited about this because not only was he really good at Duke without a lot of resources, ironically, his starting quarterback, Riley Leonard, who's going to be on the other sideline in this game, gets hurt last year. But I think more importantly, just a lot of the stuff that was lacking under Jimbo Fisher, don't think it's going to be an issue with this program. Accountability, there was off the field stuff, obviously, with that 2022 recruiting class. All the stuff that I think was an issue there, it's not going to be an issue here. I think Elko runs a tighter ship. I think Tommy Moffitt, the strength and conditioning coach, brings a lot of accountability and toughness to this team. I'm curious to see what this offense looks like with new offensive coordinator Colin Klein. But what's also interesting, and this is the important part, it's not as though this program is going to be lacking for talent in the Mike Elko era, because you could criticize Jimbo Fisher for a lot, but he left the cupboard full. And even after a graduating class, even after a couple players entered the transfer portal, a lot of players, Walter Nolan to Ole Miss, Fadil Diggs to Syracuse, Evan Stewart, on and on, there is still so much talent on this team. Clearly, it all starts with Connor Wigman. Listen, Connor, I'm so curious to see this kid. We mentioned Cade Klubnik earlier in the show, earlier in this preview show. Cade Klubnik was really highly rated coming out of high school, but so too was Connor Wigman. As a true freshman 2 years ago, comes on late and is awesome. 8 touchdowns, no interceptions. As a true freshman, leads A&M to a season-ending win over LSU. Then last year starts off really well. Almost 1,000 yards passing, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in the first 4 games, but unfortunately does get hurt in that Auburn game, does not come back. And then we go to the Max Johnsons of the world. We go to the 3rd, 4th string quarterbacks. And really the season was completely off the rails the second that Connor Wigman was out. Good news is he's back. He's healthy. And again, plenty of talent around him. Le'Veon Moss at running back. Obviously, a little bit of disappointing news. Reuben Owens is hurt and out for the foreseeable future in that running back room. But the wide receiver room is good. The tight end room brings back Donovan Green. And we'll see about the offensive line, because there is certainly returning talent, but it hasn't necessarily been the best talent in all of college football. And as a matter of fact, I think if you want to argue that there is a weakness on this Texas A&M team, it is probably that offensive line. According to PFF, last year they ranked 94th in pass blocking, 91st in run blocking. Those are things that have to improve. Those are things that, frankly, are probably part of the reason that Jimbo Fisher is not here, and part of the reason why A&M quarterbacks have not been able to stay healthy. Defensively, by the way, A&M is stacked, right? A lot of returning talent. Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart along that defensive line. Nick Scourton, probably a name that everybody in college football needs to know. Originally from College Station, went to Purdue, transferred back. You know, this guy led the Big Ten in sacks last year, 10 sacks, 15 TFLs, and he is just a guy. You talk to anybody around A&M, they have raved about this guy in the spring, in fall camp, and that defense is going to be led by this kid. But there is talent, again, at all 3 levels. Criticize Jimbo Fisher for what you want. Talent was not an issue. As far as Notre Dame's concerned, really kind of an interesting team, right? I think just about everybody has them in the playoff picture. And as time goes on, that schedule looks easier and easier. I mean, I think if they can get out of this game, I don't think 12-0 is out of the realm of possibility. Even if they lose this one, toughest games left on the schedule would be Florida State at home later in the year, would be USC on the road. So this is a big one for Notre Dame. You get this win, it's hard to find the losses on the schedule. But also, it's just interesting to think about this Marcus Freeman program going into year 3. 2 really solid seasons, but I don't know that they've had like that statement moment that we're all looking for. They've had ups, they've had downs, they've had ebbs, they've had flows, they've had peaks, they've had valleys. Last year, you almost beat Ohio State, but can't quite get over the hump. You smoke USC, and then all of a sudden you realize that maybe USC isn't as good as we thought. You lose a couple games that you don't expect to at Clemson when Clemson was struggling. So we're looking for that signature moment, that signature season from Marcus Freeman. And it starts with a name that I just mentioned a minute ago, Riley Leonard, the transfer from Duke, where, of course, he played for Mike Elko. We'll be curious to see Riley Leonard. Unfortunately, of course, last season ended with an injury in late October. Well, he's back. He's healthy. And I'm curious to see if we get the 2022 version of Riley Leonard, the guy that many thought was projecting to be a first-round pick last year had he stayed healthy. 64% completion percentage, 20 passing touchdowns, 13 rushing touchdowns. Notre Dame's wide receiver room is improved via the transfer portal. And that defense, man, was filthy a year ago. Top 10 in total offense, top 10 in total defense. Great play along the defensive line. But the secondary was really kind of where things got very intriguing. Xavier Watts, 7 interceptions, tied for the most in college football. Benjamin Morrison, 3 interceptions. So that secondary is deep. That secondary is talented. And I am so fired up to see this team. Now, in terms of when these two teams step on the field, listen, I think it's going to be really interesting because I think you have two very good defenses going up against, in my opinion, offenses with question marks, right? For Texas A&M, the big question, Connor Wigman, he is coming off of injury, and that offensive line has not been good. I gave you the stats. PFF said they were basically in the bottom third of college football in both pass blocking and run blocking a season ago. So when I look at A&M, even in the big picture of this season, how much improved is that O-line? How improved is Connor Wigman? Can he stay healthy? Those are things that we have to answer, and we will get answered. And then from Notre Dame's perspective, this is where it gets interesting to me. Everybody likes the Riley Leonard addition, but the big question is how much rust is there? Because the thing about Riley Leonard, I was, obviously doing my homework over the course of the last few weeks, and you start to remember it's not just that he got hurt late in the season for Duke and he missed the last month and a half of the season. It's that he also wasn't cleared for spring ball. So we're talking about a guy that really didn't get cleared until the middle to the end of the summer. Really hasn't gone live in almost a year. And so when I look at this game, I'll be blunt. My initial thought was that I was going to take Texas A&M -2.5. But I'll be honest, I actually think the smarter play is probably to take the under here. Now, the under, the point total is low, 46.5. But again, I go back to a few things with both these teams. From the Notre Dame perspective, Riley Leonard, as I just said, coming off of major lower body surgery and did not only play late in the year, but did not play in the spring. But here's the other part. Notre Dame, I think we just assume always going to be great along the offensive line, and they may be. But at the same time, Notre Dame has lost 4 of its 5 starters from a year ago along that O-line. And then their starting left tackle, who was a replacement to begin with, went out for the season with an injury. So you have a new quarterback behind a new O-line. It's worth noting, we talked about the helmet communication stuff with Cam Ward on the road. First game, how do they adjust that whole situation? I can't bet Notre Dame. But at the same time, I worry just enough about that Texas A&M O-line against the Notre Dame D-line that I'm going to stay away. By the way, if you listen to this show, there's been plenty of times where I've backed Texas A&M, know that I shouldn't. I end up regretting it. So to me, the smart play here, I think it's just a stay away from the point total perspective. If you're making me pick, I do like Texas A&M to win this game. But to me, I think the smarter play, just go under. I think both teams are going to struggle to score. I don't think either team is going to play at a crazy tempo. I don't even know what tempo looks like, by the way, in this helmet comms era. Felt like Florida State and Georgia Tech were both playing a little slower than I remember other teams in the past. But I just bring it up because if you're making me pick, I'll take Texas A&M. But my official best bet is the under of 46.5 in this game. Let's go to the next game on the docket. And we got to do it, people. I know some of you are going to be mad. Why are you talking about this game? But it is the marquee game on Thursday night. So the opening night of week 1. Remember, we get Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday night. How about this? Colorado Buffaloes. That's right. Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, Colorado. You love them, you hate them, but I promise you'll be watching. They are facing the North Dakota State Bison. North Dakota State, of course, from the FCS. Colorado, a 9.5-point favorite. The over-under set at 59.5. And if you want any reflection, by the way, Deion, Coach Prime, will probably do some media availability later this week. We are recording here on Tuesday, but I just bring it up to very simply say, you want to know how Coach Prime feels about this game? Just look at his comments at Big 12 Media Day, where he looked his AD in the eye and said, Rick George, you couldn't have given me a layup to start the season. So it is clear that he has respect for this team. And I'll be honest, I am as intrigued by Coach Prime and Colorado as anybody in all of week 1. When you look at this game and you look at Colorado, I'll be honest. We all know how last year went and last year ended. You start 3-0, you have the excitement of the TCU, Nebraska, Colorado State wins. Some people were talking about Colorado as a playoff team. I never saw it. Get humbled a little bit by Oregon. But then, you nearly beat USC. You do beat Arizona State. And all of a sudden you feel like, hey, we got a chance to get bowl eligible, whatever. Unfortunately, after, a 4-2 start, you end up at 4-8 overall. After the 3-0 start, you go 1-8 down the stretch. And so it was a disappointing end. But the one thing I'm going to say about Colorado, I know nobody wants to give Coach Prime credit for anything, and he's the worst. First of all, I'm a Coach Prime guy. I think anybody who's watched this channel knows that. But the one thing that you cannot deny, if you actually just look at this roster, look at the production of players coming in, this team is infinitely more talented than a year ago when they went 4-8. And I'll take it even a step further. I think they're better at quite literally every single position group on the field. Now, it obviously starts with quarterback Shedeur Sanders. Listen, he's I don't know what else there is to say. I mean, the guy is I think a first-round talent, maybe if things go well, a number 1 overall talent. So he's back. We know that. And we understand that it was really bad last year, especially on the offensive and defensive lines. 130th in rushing yards. What was the stat? 56 sacks allowed. That was the second most in college football. But you don't have to be significantly better. You just have to be a little bit better on that O-line, allow for a run game, and then let Shedeur cook. Thing is, like I said, you look across the board, I think Colorado is better, again, at essentially every single position group on the field. Running back, Dallin Hayden is in from Ohio State. 2 years ago, he was really good. Last year, Travion Henderson is healthy. He doesn't get as many snaps, but he is in at running back. Wide receiver, Travis Hunter's back. Jimmy Horn is back. But what I really like is the new guys that are in that you may not know. Will Shepard, leading receiver at Vanderbilt, was one of the best wide receivers in the portal. The name I want you to know, write this down because I guarantee you. As a matter of fact, producer Matt, you might want to clip this one off because I'm telling you, this is the guy that people are going to get to know on Thursday night. LeJontay Wester is a transfer from Florida Atlantic, 108 catches, 1,100 yards, 8 TDs a season ago at FAU. And I actually went back and watched the Colorado spring game. Him and Shedeur have great chemistry. Whatever it is, I'm not smart enough to know when a QB and a wide receiver vibe, but these two dudes vibe, and I just think they're going to be able to throw the ball all over the field, especially because the offensive line should be improved as well. We know about the 5-star Jordan Seaton at 1 tackle. Khalil Benson, a multi-year starter in the Big Ten at Indiana, is another tackle. And listen, you're going to make fun of Indiana football. I get it. But Khalil Benson was really good. Gave up 1 sack all of last year. This is, again, starting at Indiana, starting against the likes of Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, whatever. Gave up 1 sack all season. So the O-line is better. The wide receiver room is better. The running back room is better. Defensive line should be better as well. BJ Green, all Pac-12 performer last year at Arizona State, is in. RIP Pac-12, by the way. You have basically the two best defensive linemen off Pitt, the Hayes kid, Sam Okunlola. Both those guys are in. You have Quincy Wiggins, a former 5-star at LSU. So I know I'm just going down the roster, but the defensive line is better. The secondary has a chance to be elite with Travis Hunter, another transfer to know Preston Hodge. I think this roster is really good. And so when I look at this game, I know everybody wants to tell me, oh, North Dakota State upset alert. I'll be honest, I just don't see it. One, with North Dakota State, listen, we all respect what North Dakota State has done the last few years, but it is worth noting, like the North Dakota State steamrolling everybody in the FCS, that era has been kind of over for a while. They have not, and I know this is going to sound silly, have not won a national championship since 2021. That's a problem a lot of people would like to have, but here's the deal. That's 3 years. They're not the best team in the FCS. Their head coach, Entz, left to take a position at USC on that new defensive staff, and it's worth noting. New head coach coming out. He was at North Dakota State years ago, was with Craig Bohl at Wyoming. Now he's coming back to the FCS level. This is not a guy that's been promoted from within. This is not a guy that has a track record and recruited all these guys and knows this program. New head coach, first-year head coach, and North Dakota State with 4 losses a season ago. And so maybe I'll be dead wrong. We get stuff wrong all the time on this show. I own it when I do. We do Aaron right, Aaron wrong every Friday for this exact reason. I don't see the loss here. I don't see where it's even close. Like I said, Colorado is better at every single position group. I think outside of the Deion media stuff, it's been pretty quiet. I watch a lot of the well-off media stuff that Deion Sanders Jr. puts out. That team looks focused. That team looks locked in. They've had some open practices that have been open to the public. I think they have a chance to be really good. Now, the schedule is brutal for Colorado, and we don't need to spend a ton of time talking about, a month down the road. But there are 5 ranked teams in the Big 12. Colorado plays all 5 of them, starting with Kansas State in just a couple weeks. And they have to go to Nebraska in week 2. So I'm not saying this team is going 12-0. I'm not saying they're unbeatable. What I am saying is I just don't see the loss in this game. Give me Colorado. Give me a comfortable, I'll say like 31-13 type win. I would think Coach Prime is probably going to get Shedeur and the starters out early, so maybe there's like a little backdoor stuff there. I just don't see the loss. I don't see it being competitive. Maybe I'm dead wrong. I know a lot of people don't like Colorado. I think this is one they cruise to victory. And then you get ready for Matt Rule, Dylan Raiola, and Nebraska in week 2. Final game I want to break down before we get out of here. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the big noon kickoff on Saturday afternoon. So we're jumping all around. So we went from Saturday to Sunday, back to Saturday to Thursday. Now we're back to Saturday. And the big noon kickoff game is Penn State at West Virginia. Penn State, an 8.5-point favorite, over under set at 51.5. With Penn State, listen, it's new, but it's not new with the Nittany Lions. A year ago, they go 10-3. And I hate to say it, it was the most Penn State season that I have ever seen. By the way, I picked Penn State to make the college football playoff, and that last year, the 14 playoff, second team from the Big Ten outside of Michigan. Safe to say that did not happen. And it was frustrating for somebody like me that believed in that program because all the pieces were there. We were sold on Drew Aller being better, but it was basically the same season that we have seen from Penn State time and time and time again. Defense was elite. Offense wasn't good enough. You go to Ohio State. We talked about it at the time. Ohio State, the worst quarterback situation they'll ever have. Can't get a win. Michigan, we've talked about it. They don't know who their head coach is going to be 2 hours before kickoff. Jim Harbaugh flies with them to Happy Valley. He gets suspended before the game. Sharon Moore still leads them to victory. So it was a disappointing end. You lose to Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl. But there is optimism. I mean, listen, you went 10-3. It's a 12-team playoff era. And if you take care of business, you go 10-2 this year in the regular season, you're going to that 12-team playoff. The big piece of news out of Penn State this year going into the season, we know what it is. It is they have a new offensive coordinator, and they claim it's going to be so different this year. Now, we'll see if it's actually any different. but the name to know there, I'm going to butcher this name. I might just end up calling him Coach K. I got Andy Kotwalnicki, I believe is the name. The one thing I do know about him, he was at Kansas. And Kansas, I don't think people appreciate. Kansas has been awesome. They won 9 games last year, essentially with mostly a backup quarterback, 4th in the nation in scoring, 3rd in total offense. So if he can transition that with Drew Aller, we're cooking with gasoline. Problem with Drew Aller, listen, we know what it was. A year ago, 60% completion percentage, 25 TDs, 2 INTs. That sounds great. The issue is, of course, that in the biggest games, he just did not show up. Final, the 3 losses, 50% completion percentage in those games. I think it was actually like 49.8%. So, I mean, we're talking about a situation where he just wasn't good. He just wasn't good in the biggest games. And so you got to be better. You have the new offensive coordinator. We'll see if it gets better. In terms of West Virginia, they were one of the best stories in college football last year. Neil Brown, remember, was on the hot seat entering the year. All the guy did was casually win 9 games a season ago. How did they do it for people who did not watch? By the way, they actually played Penn State pretty tough week 1 in Happy Valley. You wouldn't know it looking at the final score, but that game was, pseudo competitive until late. Penn State did score with 10 seconds to go to get to cover. But that was a game that, was 21-7 going into the final quarter. And so with West Virginia, what you need to know, what they do better than anybody, quite literally almost, they just run the football. Neil Brown took over play calling last year, 3rd nationally in rush yardage, 228 yards per game. So they're going to run the ball. Their quarterback, Garrett Green, is good, but he can be a little bit erratic. He was a guy that completed about 53% of his passes a season ago, but a guy that can beat you with his arms and his legs, because that 53% completion percentage, don't forget, he also rushed for about 700 yards and 13 touchdowns. Now, in terms of this game, I have a feel, I got an instinct, and I'm going to take the under a 51.5 in this game. Let me explain why. Bottom line is, listen, nobody does PR in the offseason like college football coaches. Think about just what we've talked about on this show. Billy Napier, this year's different, most accountable team we've ever had. Lincoln Riley, defense is miles ahead of where it was a year ago. Brian Kelly, defense is way better than it was a year ago. You go on and on. Everybody's got all the answers in the offseason. But what I truly believe is that once the games kick off, you revert back to who you are as a coach and as a program, right? And so Penn State can say all the right things. Oh, this offense is going to be this, it's going to be that. Drew Aller is going to be amazing. Well, here's the bottom line. Yeah, if you're opening against William and Mary at home, yeah, I think you're probably going to try to light it up. But what we know how James Franklin coaches in big games, especially on the road, it's going to be loud, it's going to be hostile. And my guess is, I don't want to say he coaches tight, but I think he might coach a little bit tight. I think he's going to be conservative. I think he's going to rely on the ground game. And then when West Virginia has the ball, it's strength on strength, which is unfortunate for them. They have an elite run game. I didn't even talk about that Penn State defense, which was top 10 nationally in basically every category. If the offense was even competent, that's a team that goes to the playoff and potentially has a chance to win there. Offense was terrible last year. Defense was elite. Well, this defense, I think, shuts down that West Virginia run game. So in the end, I like Penn State probably wins. It wouldn't shock me, by the way, if they don't win. Just let the record show, which, by the way, if they don't, we're going live on the Air Tours Pod YouTube channel at 3:05 Eastern time to break it down, because I am not a James Franklin guy. I think he's a fine coach. I think he's, he does coach good in big games. And so I just bring it up because we'll see if we have to go live at 3:05. But at the same time, what I do believe is this game is going to be low scoring. I don't know if either team even gets to 24. A lot of ground game, a lot of clock stoppage, or a lot of non-clock stoppage with the ground game. Again, the helmet comms. Are you going to let Drew Aller open things up? I think the helmet comms can slow things down. To me, this over-under of 51.5 is an absolute no-brainer. That is my best bet. All right, I think that's it for this episode. How about that? Week 1 picks are in. Week 1 picks are in. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. YouTube, click that subscribe button. You make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres pod. Make sure to subscribe to the College Football Betting Pod. It's football season. We got our picks in for people who missed it. I like the Florida money line in the swamp. I like USC plus 4.5 against LSU. I like Georgia minus 13.5 against Clemson. I like the under of 46.5 in the Notre Dame game against Texas A&M. I like Colorado and Coach Prime to cover easily that 9.5 against North Dakota State. And as mentioned, 51.5. I like the under of Penn State, West Virginia. That's all for today's show. Going to get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support. And I'll tell you what, if you love the college football coverage, we will be live Thursday night after Colorado, North Dakota State, breaking everything down. Appreciate everybody's support. We'll be live on the YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe. And the podcast will obviously be going up shortly thereafter. Appreciate everybody. Enjoy week